working? Brilliant.
Working, yeah, we're good, we're good. Julian, thank you, and apologies for the delay in getting started. I hope I haven't messed up your time schedule for the day.
No, man, it's good. It's good. I actually grabbed some time to do. I tell you what I was doing. I was reading out an interview that I did back in the day in 1993 with Terence McKenna.
Wow.
Which totally dropped out of my head. And then I got like an old zine that I used to run, yeah. And there's an interview with the dude inside. So yes, I used the opportunity to just like read that out. I didn't do the funny voice. I thought I wouldn't, wouldn't disrespect the man by trying to go, the machine elves of hyperspace or whatever.
Oh, and you do it well. Oh no.
How are you? How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, my man. I've had a unpredictable busy morning, which was meant to just be in chilling until I decided to get up. But I was inspired by the weather because it was nice and bright, and it's currently just pouring down with rain now. So I just tried to get out and back. And the queues out in the London streets at the moment are like just full on. I thought Sunday used to be the quiet day. So I just had to pop out and get a few things, and it ended up being a lot longer than I thought I was going to be in and out. So yeah, that's London life for you. Back to normalish. But yeah, as you know, I've kind of, because we've touched base upon why I've invited you to this space, talking slop. But just to share with you, it's a platform that was organically evolved over the last few weeks to months, based on an idea that I had and was building with a few other people about just basically creating platforms for us to spread the spores and engage interesting people who have, inspired us, we've worked with, shared platforms with, and so forth. And you're one of those people, man, in my life, in my world. As much as you may not be aware of the influences, the subtle as well as the obvious ones that you may not even be aware of, some of that I'll share with you. But I appreciate the role that you've played, and just, in the short time in my experience in the psychedelic world, just your role, within the grand scheme of things, and then how you've looked out for me, man. You've reached out and plugged me in and made sure that, I was kind of seen and heard in places as well. And I really appreciate, I really appreciate that. So I definitely thought, Julian's got to get on the platform and talk slop with Julian. And it really is an organic platform where we just talk slop. And slop is spinning off the whole P-Funk, cosmic, funkadelic, era. And the slop is the shit, man. So we just talk shit. Because within the shit, we understand that many divine things can come out of the shit. And I'm aware that you're one of these people that would know this as well. So just in the sense of, from a perspective of, life, and when you go through some shit, you come out the other end, you feel a lot better for it. I know the value of shit, of just talking shit with my friends. Sometimes you talk shit and divine things come out of those conversations that you never would have planned to. As a horticulturalist, I know how important shit is, farmyard manure, and everything. So, I've realized that a lot of the time, what we would call the negative or the waste or the bad stuff actually can be really divine. And I appreciate the divine within the shit. And so that's why we talk shit and talk slop. And hopefully some divine shit comes out of it as well, and at the same time, if it doesn't, it's just another talking slop episode, but I'm pretty sure it will, man. So there's no agendas. I have no premeditated questions. Well, in fact, in your case, I do have a few, not questions, but just areas that I would like to go into. But it really is just to open up a dialogue, get a conversation going on. It's really for me to make sure that people that I'm connected to, that are on the ground, that are not necessarily attending the societies and the conference events that are taking place, that they just got an air and a heads up on what's going on, in the current climate. And if they can plug into me, plug into you, and they can't afford, a £100 or £200 ticket to get somewhere, they've still got access to the information. So because you're one of those main players and you've done a lot of work so far and you just started off, I think I want to keep that bit at the beginning as well, where you pulled out the magazine, and we can touch on that as well, because that's just part of what this is about, is sharing the platform with people who may be known. So people might know Julian, and from various perspectives, but I want to do this where it's like, if there is an interview that you've done, if you're someone who regularly does interviews and stuff like that, that this isn't one of those interviews. It's not an interview. We're going to cover or go into areas that you wouldn't normally just get asked about, things like, what's your favorite fruit, do you have a pair of lucky draws, you know, just stuff that we can start kind of humanizing and, you know, bringing down to an equal playing field some of the icons and the fans, because these are people that I also look up to. So we're just going to go and see where we go with that. Hopefully I won't take up too much of your time, and see what I can extract from you, or from, you know, what our audience might find interesting. How does that sound?
Man, that sounds all good. I mean, likewise, as someone like yourself in who's got a kind of connection with permaculture, you know, the shit, that's the real shit. That's the good shit, you know, like, and also somebody interested in things like alchemy, you know, from the lead, from the waste, that's where we find the wisdom, you know, potentially. And certainly we have the kind of the nourishment. If we think about, like, you know, our favorite fruit, yeah, and we think about the sacred mushroom, there it is in the shit doing its thing. And what it does for us, one of the many things it can do for us, is help us with the shit, the suffering that we inevitably experience. You know, there's Buddha, the first noble truth. The world is full of suffering and difficulty, and you know, he may be a rich kid with an eating disorder, but nevertheless, he knew some stuff. Yeah, and we suffer, we find difficulty, we find like alienation, particularly perhaps maybe in the kind of cultural settings that many of us find ourselves in these days, particularly in this time of pandemic. So we have all this difficulty, and the mushrooms that grow in this material can help us find new ways to sit with that and to be empowered by the shit, yeah, so that it drives us forward. And yeah, so let's talk shit, man. That works for me. That definitely works for me. And you know, the admiration is mutual, my friend, because what I see in your work is a real heart and a real desire to kind of bring the accessibility of these ideas and the knowledge about the things like the sacred medicines into domains and into communities that don't necessarily kind of get connected with those things very readily, right? So I come from, like, my background, yeah, is I'm like a white working class dude, right? I grew up in Newtown in Stevenage in Hertfordshire, one of those places that all the people who were bombed out the East End of London in World War II were kind of put. And so I kind of grew up in this place that had an ancient sort of heart, a very kind of small little village, but then this massive like suburban sprawl. And I didn't have access to, like, I don't know, like many people who were kind of exemplars in that space, you know, none, basically. I had like what was available in my local library in terms of the kind of weirdy esoteric stuff I was interested in, psychedelics, all of those sorts of things, but like pitifully small amounts of information. And so getting the rhizome to penetrate through some of that difficult shit that we have in our communities, where there's people for whom, you know, the psychedelic thing, for example, is like way outside their cultural framework. And that includes members of my own family, you know, and to recognize and to help those people understand that there's healing, there's insight, there's joy, there's empowerment, there's discovery, there's a remarkable amount of safety if we do these things well in those states and in those experiences, is like something that, you know, I really respect from your work. So yeah, all good, all very good.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that too, Julian. And you've kind of gone into where I would normally just start with this process, is just, you know, tell us a bit about yourself, who you are, you know, as much as you would like to share, and then I'll piggyback off the back of that, and, you know, we'll just see where we go, man.
I mean, I guess the thing for me, Darren, was I was just like interested in magic, interested in like the occult, the mysterious, the esoteric, whatever we want to call this stuff.
Yeah.
And I was interested in that from like as long as I can remember, right? Like if I was being all romantic about it, I'd say that maybe I had like a calling or a vocation or a previous life. I don't know, but I just really, this was the shit that I dug. Yeah, I really liked it. And so I started prowling around my library. I would read anything that kind of came across my radar, watch the tiny scraps of stuff on TV of, you know, every Halloween, some kind of like witches would be trotted out and like put on local telly, and I would be like, wow, this is really fascinating. So there's people out there doing this stuff that I really like. And I guess I got to maybe like my teenage years, and I started going to what back in the day were called like mind, body and spirit kind of festivals, you know, where you get, you know, where there's places where you walk in, there's like a, I don't know, it's like a village hall or something, and there's all these people doing tarot readings and like you know, people with bottles of herbs and all this kind of thing. And I was like, whoa, this is amazing. This is obviously prior to a thing called the internet, yeah? So like that whole layer of data that people have got access to, like the material we're producing today, that simply did not exist, yeah? So you had like books, zines, you know, things like the thing I was kind of like waving around earlier on that I was involved with in the 90s. And you had meeting people. That was the way it had to happen. So I got involved in a Wiccan group in North London, when I was quite young, I was 16. Like the high priestess of the coven had to phone my mum and say, like, do you know what this dude's doing? And she was just amazing, like really tolerant, thoughtful, lovely people. My parents, lovely people. And she was like, yeah, I know it's a bit weird, but you know, I trust you, whatever, let's do it. So I kind of went and had my first experience of like working in ritual setting with people. And I kind of got involved in ritual magic and witchcraft kind of ceremony, but very kind of eclectic, very like we would build our own ceremonies. We wouldn't necessarily take them fully formed from a book. We'd construct them. And that's something that's always remained with me, part of my process, because I don't have a lineage and I don't have a backstory and I don't have like, I didn't have at that stage exemplars to draw on. So we had to like be the magpie and just pick up the shiny thing from the shit and try and assemble whatever we could in the best way that we could.
Yeah.
And I guess from there, yeah, kind of got involved in esoteric practice in various different styles. And then it got to maybe, I had an experience with LSD when I was maybe 21, 22, something like this. And it was amazing because I realized that a lot of the prior work that I'd done with like all the meditation and yoga and visualization and all this esoteric tech had really prepared me very well for the psychedelic experience. Roll on a few years more, I started getting involved in like, okay, so how do we blend these things together? I had opportunities to hang out with people from like South America and India and various kind of entheogenic lineages, I guess you'd call it, where they had much deeper practice and tradition. And then also, of course, became interested in the whole kind of, you know, the science, although that was being put on hold very much through the sort of latter part of the 20th century. There was still material from the 60s to read, and the 50s, and to find out about these things. And I started drawing those things together in my practice into, you know, psychedelic ceremony, you know, which I don't do all the time. Like most of my daily practice is like a bit of yoga, some meditation, some, you know, body work or whatever. But it's certainly now an important part of where I see the esoteric tradition that I was interested in. It turns out the more you unpick that, the more you start to see that there's actually this tradition of using cannabis, of using various kind of psychoactives and psychedelics, and that's actually that was part of my lineage. I just kind of didn't know at the time, you know. So yeah, that's that in a nutshell is the backstory, man.
Nice, man. Thank you for sharing. And we're definitely going to get into the psychedelic subject, but I want to go back a bit before, you know, we delve into that. And just as far as growing up, like you said, as a 16-year-old delving into the occult and esoteric, you know, areas, but getting the support from your parents, which is amazing. You know, support, the best support you can get, I guess, when you're stepping into that unknown dark area, which is taboo pretty much where I come from in my community and everywhere else I went around the world to this day. So just navigating from a 16-year-old to where you are now, and just, you know, what have been some of the challenges or the blessings of being inducted at such a young age into, you know, into that field?
I think there's various things, man. I mean, there's one of them is like what we were doing was in terms of magic, there were all kinds of social factors existing at the time. So there was a lot of kind of prejudice about, like, you know, we were, I don't know, killing babies and worshipping goats and all that kind of stuff. So there was that whole Hammer House of horror kind of thing going on. Later on, as we hit the 80s and 90s, there was a whole kind of satanic ritual abuse craziness, which was mediated by fundamentalist religious people and various people who wanted to kind of, I don't know, kind of carve out a niche for themselves as sort of almost professional victims of this imagined conspiracy. And there was a lot of, so a lot of the stuff had to be really kind of below the radar. Like you had to be really thoughtful about this. It was kind of like dealing with drugs is, yeah. So you couldn't necessarily reveal what you were kind of interested in or up to. And yeah, I was very lucky that I had a very kind of tolerant family who just kind of went like, he's weird, but he seems to be basically okay. So let's let the guy, go and do his thing. My mum was kind of interested in, or is interested in, spiritualism. So there was a little strand there, I guess, of kind of connection. I suppose one of the challenges was the fact that we were very information poor. So I would open a book on I don't know, one of those 1970s coffee table occult books with all the pictures of like spooky stuff going on in it, and I'd look at that, and I'd look at things like there were these pictures of these dudes who were called shaman, and they were like, they had different skin color from me, and they had different hats and stuff, and they were from far away. And I kind of imagined that this thing was like sort of, I don't know, like this unattainable kind of stuff located in far distant lands. And it took a while for me to understand that that it's about like respecting and acknowledging and citing those influences, but actually that a lot of those processes are inherently human processes. Yeah. So the processes of ritualization, the process of making sacred space, the process of going through altered states of awareness individually or in community with others, that's like a human thing, and it didn't really matter what the dude looked like or what how the woman's kind of crazy hat was, that was from their story, but the story was a global story. It was a story for all people. So that was a big thing for me. And I guess I might have understood that perhaps better had I had more information, if I'd have been able to access like more of the story of my own esoteric tradition. I think one of the differences between then and now, which is really, I find really fascinating, is that I do quite a lot of kind of online mentoring for people, yeah? And one of the things I find is that people who are younger than me, they've got like the opposite problem. They're like drowning in the sea of information, all these competing voices of like, oh, this is the way, this is the truth, this is the light. It's not even like there was like one version, Orthodox Christianity, saying actually this is the deal. There's now all this stuff, and trying to kind of cut your way through that data, I think, is quite challenging for people. And I guess one of the things that I'm able to do is to sort of, as best I can, from the perspective that I've got, say, well, I have found these things useful, these resources, these texts, these techniques, and help people kind of draw out from that. But yeah, that's a bit of the kind of context, man. I guess that that answers it properly, or kind of gives us like...
No proper answer, man. I was just so for you, man. That's more than what I anticipated you sharing, because again, it's just part of some of the information that I share. Is really engaging with young people, and that this information being accessible to the young, because back in the days, and still to this day in certain parts of the world, you're initiated into these schools of thoughts from birth, pretty much. You're born into a ritual. You're born with these things happening around you, and it's present every day. So I remember growing up, you sound like some of the guys I might have went to school with at that time in North London, who were basically, they were the weird ones to us, from our perspective. It was like, yeah, they were, I remember a guy at school and he was bringing in Ouija boards, and there was another group of guys who were, going to the Heath every weekend, taking psychedelics. And as I say, I'm just like, I don't know what these guys are up to, but just leave that alone, simply because if I would, and when I did go home and say, oh, mum, so-and-so at school brought in a Ouija board, she's like, stay away from that. Like that's fundamentally, he's going around telling everybody how they're going to die in school. Like, people actually signing up. He's got a list of people that want to know how they die. This is a real deal story. And when I'm telling my mum, she's like, you better, you stay away from these people. And I'm fortunate that I was around some cool people, and my mum, opened up to, on her journey as well, where we accessed more type of information, where you see around the world, it's a human thing of these rituals and these rites and the usages of plants and so forth. And just as far as, I'm looking at in today's part of the world, most people who I engage with who are interested in this now are in their middle, out of their childhood. They're out of their childhood, definitely. And most of them are like hitting brick walls and at crossroads of their lives, and are having midlife crises and stuff like that. And that's why they're then coming to these alternative approaches. But these alternative approaches are the things that be fundamentally rooted in society and human psyches as long as we've been here. And because they've been in such a loaded, taboo, dark thing, and then people stand out and represent that, I know that that can't be easy, man. That's not an easy journey. I mean, just me speaking about psychedelic is one thing, but when you start talking about the occult and the esoteric, and I can see behind you, I can see, you know, there's a star behind you and stuff. And I know from the untrained eye, that, you know, what is all that stuff you're into, me, you know, because it really, like, it's loaded as well. It's just the devil. You're working with, you know, with the devil stuff. So I really want to go there. I want to open that up, because I've gone on my own esoteric occult journey through some of my teachers and elders who introduced me to these schools of thought, you know, from Asian, African, indigenous practices all the way up to Western magic, and how they all synchronize and are interwoven in some places. So I definitely want to go there. But what I would want to open that up with is two areas, because you mentioned earlier on, just as a 16-year-old, having to basically not having your own foundations in this, you know, in this, and having to work with what you've got, what was presented with you. That's pretty much how it was for me as an African Caribbean person, you know, first generation born here without the resources. And that's what I've gathered over the years, that that's the position that many people have been put in based on the way the world is, the history, you know, has been presented to us now. But the point being, how did you, how can I put it? How would you, you know, navigate, I've lost my train of thought, but the idea around that you're dealing with this kind of satanic devil thing.
Yeah.
You know, what is that? And that's the point I was making, so I'll come back. And the fact that you've had to pick from random things that were presented to you, it ties in with an idea or something that was presented to me around chaos magic. And I've heard you talk about chaos magic before. So I'm looking at how have you got away with being an occult, esoteric, dark lord, I guess, from some people's perspective. I've met you. You're an amazing, energetic, friendly, open. Like it looks and appears very contradictory.
Man. I mean, I guess it's there are several things in there. I mean, one of the ways of thinking about this is to think about Pan. Okay, so if we take the classical god Pan, the ancient Greek god Pan, whose name, I think pretty much by a linguistic coincidence, also means all. So the word Pan means all, everything. And Pan is one of those characters that, if you think about the mythology that you'll have kind of come across, maybe you've read like Wind in the Willows, where Pan appears to the little animals in the Piper of the Gates of Dawn. Or maybe you've read The Great God Pan by Arthur Machen, where this scary force is trying to break through into the universe. And in some respects, what we're looking at here is we're looking at this, what I kind of call the deep magic, right? So it's not about like peripheral stuff of, it's not even about like sort of, you know, good and evil. Is Pan good or is he evil? It kind of depends on how you meet him and depends on what the interaction is. Pan is the spirit of like the wildness. He's the horned god in some respects. He both brings panic and he also brings ecstasy. And that's kind of the deal. And if you think about something like, let's take it to the mushroom, yeah? Let's take it to the mushroom. What does the mushroom do? Well, the psilocybin mushroom, you can take it and it can be heaven or hell. And that's kind of the point. It doesn't mean the mushroom is bad. It just means the mushroom is powerful. And the mushroom can do many things. And so that set of like the iconography of these powerful, potentially beautiful, but potentially also kind of disturbing. We're stirring the cauldron of the unconscious mind here, yeah? We're doing big work. We're bringing up some of our shadow, some of our difficulty. Doesn't mean we'd be horrible to other people. That's like, you know, if we want to smash taboos, we want to smash taboos like racism, you know, resource inequality, that, you know, gender stuff. That's the big stuff to kind of be working on. But this deep magic, this kind of this interest that I have in the occult by its very nature is the hidden. So if you're interested in studying that which is hidden, you're continuously studying the mystery. You're continuously studying and getting engaged with, but in a sense, no closer to the answer. It's a process of engaging with whatever that deep magic is, and the way you understand that, and the way you can access that. You look at shamanism. So shamanism, we know, incorporates things like divination, incorporates things like healing. A lot of the healing process in a lot of kind of shamanic paradigms is very adversarial. It's very like, you know, there's a spirit intrusion, I'm going to pull it out of you. It's like it has a violence to it. It has a power to it. It might be in the service of healing, but in the same way that a surgeon is kind of going to do violence to you, it's going to be like a powerful act, you know. That's, I think, what we're interested in very often when we're talking about magic. We're talking about ways of accessing these powerful experiences and these powerful feelings, of which psychedelics are for me, one of the primary ways of doing it. And of course, like the Piper at the Gates of Dawn, it can be this beautiful moment of understanding the divine connection and beauty of nature. And it can also be like this experience that is really powerful, transformative, and at times terrifying. You know, high dose psilocybin is a thing, right? High dose psilocybin, you will probably feel you're going to die. The medicine will probably not kill you, but that experience of going to your death, of going to that kind of stuff, that's powerful medicine. And so some of the set dressing, some of the spooky stuff, is indicative of that power. I would say, you know, yeah, I think that's kind of an important part of what we're working with here. Is we're working with powerful forces, powerful things, not necessarily things that are bad for us, in the same way that the psilocybin isn't bad for us. In fact, it's healing. Yeah. But that engagement with the shadow and that engagement with the deep magic can, at least superficially, it can seem kind of threatening and difficult. And of course, as humans, go through times when we have difficulty, grief, sadness, loss, suffering. It's actually part of the program. It's the way it goes. Yeah. You know?
I always say the same, just in regards to electricity, you know, just how we use electricity. Electricity can kill someone, and I know they use electricity to bring people back to life. You know?
Yeah, totally. It's a commonly used analogy with magic. Magic is just a power, and in the same way that psychedelics have a power, and unfortunately, we know, much to I like to think, our cultural embarrassment in the future, that one of the first things that our cultures did to psychedelics is say, can we weaponize these? Can we turn these into battlefield incapacitants? Can we turn these into truth drugs? Can we turn these into all sorts of horrible, horrible things? Because they have that power, you know? And obviously, as just as a person, you know, you might engage with those powerful things, but you want in the world, you're trying to do that for kind of, in a way, the liberation of the self and the liberation of all beings. Like, I can't be happy fundamentally unless you're happy, because we're connected. Yeah, we're intimately interconnected, all of the systems. So it's not like, for me, like a personal, I'm going to be this super powerful sorcerer. Man, I'm just a bag of mostly water on the third rock from the sun in a tiny little planet in like a nowhere bit of the galaxy. Like, I'm nothing special, like none of us really are. But as a network, you know, we're something really quite remarkable and quite awesome. And if we have to deal with the shadow, we have to deal with the difficulty to plug into that. And if we have to go through these potentially challenging experiences, like initiatory experiences, the classic initiation involves a period of being in the dark, alone, and frightened. And then coming out of that into something remarkable. And that's what a lot of the kind of magical tech is really about.
Nice. So it's basically, it may look and appear dark, and that's because you're working on your dark, your shadow, which we've kept in the dark for so long in most cases, and it's something that we don't really like to unpack. But I've gathered, like you said, it's kind of like a rebirth and a resurrection when you actually face it and go through it. I do totally understand, though, you know, from the outside looking in, just how Hollywood and all the rest of it is just giving us an image, you know, and especially when you first, like for me, when I first got into, you know, consciousness outside of, because my first real eye openers were through music. It was music that I was listening to that was just making me think, well, how do they know that? Where are they finding this out from? And, you know, where's that coming from? But when I stepped in at that time into discovering more information, you know, it was like all that conspiracy theorist stuff comes out. And then the first thing you hear about this type of practice, this is what the government are doing, this is the Illuminati stuff, and they're working with goats, like you said. Baphomet comes up a lot, and, you know, and it took a lot for me to, you know, get my head around, you know, separating, you know, the wheat from the chaff and the truth from the falsehood, and just me understand, well, what really is this stuff? And I'm aware that you've delved in and speak about that, and, you know, teach about that, because from my, we'll get into Cornwall in a bit, but just as far as, yeah, just to unpack some of this, just so we can get clarity. So for example, say, you know, what do these tools or emblems mean? What do they represent if they're not these dark demonic forces? You know, how are they utilized? Like, for example, the pentagram. And I would like really want to go into the Baphomet, like what is Baphomet and to you?
Yeah, man.
You know,
Okay, so that is well, you know, it's like one of my favorite subjects. Yeah. So, all right. So Baphomet starts life as a mishearing of probably the name of the Prophet Muhammad, which the Knights Templar are accused of worshipping some kind of idol that's called Baphomet back in the kind of 13th century, right? The whole thing goes horribly wrong for them. The order is destroyed by, amongst other people, Philip the Fair of France at the time, the king at the time, and the Pope, and whatever. So this word is like a piece of grit in an oyster, right? Around which, over time, a whole bunch of ideas kind of coalesce, and it really starts to kick in during the time of the kind of 1800s, with the publication of various books that initially are about the Knights Templar. They were really bad. They were kind of, you know, Satanists or whatever. They were worshipping this thing. What happens is that over that sort of 18th century or 18th and 19th century period, Baphomet starts to be re-understood by kind of almost sort of like a romantic movement. So the romantic movement is this kind of movement in philosophy and art and literature, where basically the people in the sort of late, you know, through the 18th and 19th centuries are looking back, and they're looking at for all the baddies in history, and they're going, actually, we're under this massively repressive religious, you know, predominantly kind of Christian framework, and the development of science, and we're looking for like our romantic ancestors in the past, just kind of the way I was as a kid, I guess. So things like witches get re-understood as rebels against the status quo, and the Druids get re-understood as these forces that are opposing the Roman Empire. Yeah, so this is, historically, it's kind of debatable, but nevertheless, what's happening is this radical reappraisal of things. Yeah, it's like the way that we take words, queer as an example, and we reimagine what that means as a powerful thing for people, people's identity. So Baphomet then turns up in the work of a dude called Eliphas Levi, and he draws the classic image that, like, you'll have seen a million times over, with the figure with the goat's head and a hand pointing down and a hand pointing to the sky.
Her, did you say?
Pardon?
Did you say her?
Well, I said a figure. Here, they. Because part of the point of it, yeah, is you're pointing to, is it's like this figure's got breasts, and it's got like a stylized penis. It's got like a caduceus of the god Mercury with the two snakes. It's got scales, it's got hooves, it's got wings. Like, what's going on? So this is the figure that Eliphas Levi draws, and he kind of says this is a figure that represents the. It looks satanic, but actually it's kind of God, because it's the unification of opposites. It's this, like the mycelium. It's like this thing that's connected to all these different life forms. Yeah, it's connected to above and it's connected to below. It's connected to the high and the deep. And later on, that figure is used by people like Aleister Crowley in his work. It turns up in various forms, and it turns up a lot in chaos magic. So this dude, Pete Carroll, who writes a few books, Liber Null and Psychonaut, and another book called Liber Chaos, and he describes it really in a really interesting way, which frames a lot of my thinking about it, which he says Baphomet is the sum total of all the psychic life force of all the life forms on the planet at any one time. So you can think of it like, going back to the god Pan, this is this being which is, you know, it's bilaterally symmetrical, just like your face is, just like my face is, because we're attuned as a hominid to see faces. You know, it's got this kind of this bifurcated horns. You get horns in loads and loads of, like, yeah, we know this from like the North African tradition of ancient Egypt, where we've got all these kind of horned deities, Num and Hathor and so on. So this represents power. And we also have this figure that is all of the creatures in the world, all the species coming together. Bear in mind that as Eliphas Levi is drawing his diagram, people like Wallace and people like Darwin are coming up with this radical idea, an idea that's so radical that these days we don't even notice it for the most part, that we are intimately interconnected with all the other life forms. We're not something that has kind of been dropped from space by Jehovah and just like turns up in his image. We're actually part of the biosphere. So for me, the way I understand Baphomet is that Baphomet is like Pan. It's like this figure that I create, you know, maybe visually, because it's easier for me to understand something as a visual form. And I might visualize this, use any number of different practices, evocation, possession kind of states, whatever. But fundamentally, it represents the intimate interconnectedness of all the life forms. That's what this thing is about. And like Pan, it is both beautiful and terrible, because it is the devouring and the creating. Yeah, it is the shit, and it is also the flourishing of the flower. So that's why it has these kind of qualities associated with it. And people have, because it's a deity that doesn't have a myth, it doesn't have really a backstory other than that brief history. Lots of people are able to then write onto it, to imagine into it whatever they want to see. So there's a lot of people interested in Baphomet in terms of like disability or queer identity, because this is a figure that is like indeterminate, or this is a figure which is like a chimera, or like this is a, you know, mishappened figure, a strange figure, a figure that's kind of has this amorphous kind of quality to it. And so, of course, unsurprisingly, peace be upon them, 17-year-old black metal fans in Norway, they project a certain vibe onto how they see that image, because it's to some extent it's a mirror, I guess. Like a lot of divine images tend to be, ultimately they show back to ourselves aspects of ourselves. But for me, you know, it's almost a word that I would use as a synonym for like great spirit. Yeah. Or I guess God, or the goddess, or the Tao, or the whatever. It's one of the words that I use, particularly when I want to kind of have a sense of like the identity of this, the beingness of this, the spirit of this. So I guess, does that help?
Yeah, no, for sure, yeah. So it's just opening up, like, because like I said, if you Google and Baphomet comes up, you just get what you know what you're going to get. So it's like just educating people as to people who are schooled in this and work with this, what did they actually say, because they will give you maybe, you know, the Church of Satan and Aleister Crowley, the wickedest man in the world, and that's all you're getting pretty much from the unlearned, you know, the unlearned. So it's like, I want to hear from the people who, because, you know, who practice this and do this, well, they really, you know, what from the horse's mouth, so to speak.
There's so much stuff in there, man. I mean, you know, Aleister Crowley, you know, here's this dude, he comes from this incredibly abusive, difficult background. And like, he probably wasn't the easiest guy to get along with. He kind of wouldn't make sense in the 21st century, but as a radical individual exploring psychedelics, other mind-altering substances, sexuality, you know, religion, like a lot of the stuff, and he wrote loads of stuff. That's why part of the reason he's so significant is that he wrote copious amounts of material, and a lot of it's incredibly good. Some of it is genuinely funny. Like there's one of the books where a book called Book 4, or sometimes known as Magic, where he does an analysis of the magical, the key magical paraphernalia. So like, you know, the stuff you get in the tarot, the wand and the pentacle and the sword and the cup. And halfway through, he does a section called an interlude, where he takes apart nursery rhymes to show you their mysterious and magical power. And he's doing it partly tongue-in-cheek, but also partly because he's saying, look, if you look closely in anything in the universe, you can see the magic in it. You can see the mystery in it if you look closely. So he does this close analysis of old Mother Hubbard went to the cupboard to get her poor dog a bone. And he says, who's old Mother Hubbard? Well, she's got an H in her name. So she's like the symbol of Saturn. She's the great mother, the ancient great mother. She's Isis. She goes to the cupboard. What's the cupboard? Well, the cupboard is the sarcophagus. Get her poor dog, Anubis, a bone, the phallus of Osiris. Do you know what I mean? So he kind of breaks this. And so, you know, he was a person. He had like his good points and his bad points, and probably good days and bad days, like anyone. But was he the wickedest man in the world? No, I think there's other candidates for that one. Definitely.
Yeah.
And the whole eyes wide shut Baphomet thing is hilarious. What people need to, if people watching this haven't checked it out, go and Google a thing called the Leo Taxil hoax, right? So Leo Taxil was a dude who was knocking around in the end of the 19th century. Cut a long story short, basically he played like a 10-year joke on the Catholic Church, who he really hated. And his joke was to say that there was an evil conspiracy of Baphomet worshipping Freemason Knights Templars who were having orgies and doing all this kind of stuff. He ran the hoax for 10 years. He then did a press conference where, and the text of which is actually online, where he talks about how he's just played this massive joke and how he's demonstrated to all the clergy and all the members of the French government how prejudiced they are and how crazed they are, that they'll believe, because he was writing more and more crazy things about this cult, right? He eventually had to be escorted from the premises and like the police had to intervene. I mean, it was a full-on thing. But of course, inevitably, lots of people went, but it is true, isn't it? It's a put-up job. It's like a double agent thing. It's like, and that's how come the whole eyes wide shut story kind of ends up looking like it does. It's a massive joke that arguably went too far.
Yeah. And I'm going to open it up because you just made me think, because, you know, the eyes wide shut, there's the movie that's out and that kind of gives another Hollywood perspective. But would you go as far as saying that it, you know, because, you know, like even the current climate with all this, what's his, Epstein and all the, you know, it's all, there's a lot of stuff, you know, and again, I'm not in that world in, you know, like that, like I was previously, but, you know, would you go as far, is there any truth in that whatsoever, that there's, you know, people using these tools, these technologies, you know, in the places where the powers that be reside and maybe doing, or are you know, are they just, you know, old white men and women who haven't got a clue and have been given more power, you know, from the eyes of the masses and stuff than they really are in truth?
It's an interesting question, isn't it? I mean, the short answer is I don't know, right? I can't know. You know, I'm not connected into that kind of that level of money apart from anything else. So I just don't know how it operates. Yeah, I mean, you know, I did get invited to join the Freemasons, so that was all good. But I didn't see any baby eating. I just saw like a cheap bar and some old dudes who wanted to raise money for charity and do this funny ritual. And it was cool, you know, don't get me wrong. They're all nice guys. But maybe I didn't stick around long enough to kind of be admitted to the, you know, the secret bit. Who knows? I think that, you know, Alan Moore says something about the whole conspiracy thing and says that the true terror of the world is actually not that there's an Illuminati conspiracy running stuff. It's actually that the world is rudderless and nobody is in charge. And I think the people in positions of power, yeah, those like, you know, predominantly old, rich white men who probably take too much cocaine and probably have too much money to throw around. I don't think, are they doing magic? Are they doing some kind of like self-exploration? I think probably quite the reverse, And the idea that imagining that there's some kind of Illuminati Baphomet worshipping conspiracy is kind of reassuring in the face of what's probably a much simpler answer, that there are some, let's call them damaged individuals who are prepared to act out some very, very nasty things, particularly when they appear to be beyond the reach of the law and beyond the reach of kind of criticism. And it's really, really simple. I think it's incredibly simple. It's like, yeah, there's degrees of criminal conspiracy, you know. The recent hanging, wasn't it, in the jail? That is incredibly suspect, of course. So we know that there are kind of aspects of, you know, conspiratorial behavior, but I think it's much, much simpler and much more like there's a writer, philosopher called Hannah Arendt, right? And Hannah Arendt was doing, I don't know if you've come across her work. She did a lot of stuff after the about the trial of the Nazis after World War II, and she comes up with a phrase which is really interesting called the banality of evil, like the stupidity of evil, like not the idea that so she basically kind of goes, look, the Nazis were not some kind of like terrifying death cult with like super magic powers or anything like this. They were actually incredibly stupid, you know, in terms of that whole the way that evil behaves in a way that is just I think that Arendt was kind of talking about it being the things like the death camps just become kind of like normalized. Yeah, so we just become like, we've become used to this stuff. We just become inured to these kind of forms of violence against people. And actually, this violence carries on all the time in many, many ways. We just don't notice it. We spend more time wondering about whether or not there's an eyes wide shut kind of cult, rather than dealing with like the known fact that most humans on this planet haven't got fresh water. Like what, and we kind of take refuge in this idea of this hyper intelligent conspiracy, and actually what you're seeing is actually really quite tawdry and quite stupid behaviors being enacted just on a grand stage with people with lots of money,
Theatre. Okay, wow, yeah. So we opened that up, and I still wanted to touch on something, because I was always curious from your perspective as well, because I'm not a scholar on the subject, but in relation to Baphomet, just to go back to move forward, and the fraternities and the secret societies and the connections with that, part of the school of thought I was coming through at that time was sharing that it was the Moors. So if you're familiar with the Moors from North Africa, who carried with them the Islamic banner. From what I understood at the time, it's very much more political than religious, as to why they took on identities going to other lands and just, the law of the land, so to speak, and just working with what was there. But, there was a teachings that, it was the Moors that brought these emblems with them under that Islamic banner, whereas that connection with Muhammad and Baphomet may cross over. And what these Moors were actually dealing with, they were like part of the Egyptian mystery school and stuff. That's the school of thought, or where this stuff was coming from. And then they kind of cloaked it under the guise of Islam, because that was the current thing of the time. And then, that's how the mysteries were, kind of passed on further down the line and ended up in religion. And you've got Sufism, and you've got the, the esoteric elements of the various religions. But this is where, out of those teachings and who that information was passed on to, is where these fraternities and secret societies, so to speak, were birthed out of. So yeah, you familiar with that kind of?
Yeah, man. Yeah. Okay, so there's a lot of things in that. I mean, one of the things about the Knights Templar, and the reason they got accused, and the reason that it all went to shit for them, is partly because they had definitely encountered a whole bunch of Islamic wisdom and knowledge. I mean, bear in mind that Islam was like streets ahead in terms of medical knowledge at that stage. They had access to a lot of kind of Greek and classical texts, which wouldn't appear in Europe in an accessible form until the Renaissance. That's like why the Renaissance happens. They had access to they effectively had access to right the way back to pharaonic and hieroglyphic material, because there's this big thing about the Rosetta Stone and the translation of hieroglyphics, and a lot of kind of Arab, people from the Arab nations would have been familiar with the if not able to directly read hieroglyphics, would have had translations and transliterations of those texts. So this is a deep tradition. It's also a tradition with a really interesting connection with things like entheogens of various descriptions. And the Knights Templar would have encountered things like the use of cannabis. Cannabis in high dose is a really, really good anesthetic. And if you are a military order, like the Templars were, people get injured. So to have access to cannabis that's been grown in warmer conditions than the hemp that was grown in Britain at the time, and being able to get this in alcohol, which of course would also be a little bit suspect from the point of view of a lot of Islamic tradition. But that material was definitely a kind of an influence on them. And there is a good historical argument to suggest that the interface between the Templars and some of those kind of like the Hashisheen and people like this in Africa and in the Middle East, that they drew on that stuff, and that the organizations that flowed from the Templars, arguably including things like Freemasonry, were very influenced by that material. One of the things we've got to remember, of course, is that Freemasonry, one of the points of it was that it was about a way for people, men, to gather together, irrespective of the religion that they followed, in this kind of community of initiatory practice, right? Now that, again, kind of doesn't sound like a big deal now, But the idea that you could be a Muslim or a Jew or a Catholic or a Protestant, and you could stand together and you could do this thing. The other thing you've got to remember is that things like those organizations, they became kind of self-help groups, really. They before things like health services and, like, you know, any kind of like state level support for people. If you were ill, you just had no money, and possibly you died unless your family could step in, or unless you were a member of one of these communities, one of these brotherhoods, or later on sisterhoods, so that you could draw on those resources and people would support you. So there's definitely kind of a story to be told from there. One of the books up here, actually, this is, have you read this one yet? This is very good. This is product placement for Chris Bennett. So there's Liber 420, which is also like a brilliant name. And this is a really, really good text from the point of view of like getting that story of the relationship between the Western Esoteric Tradition, the Masons, the Knights Templar, and that kind of connection with particularly the sort of hashish traditions, but other stuff as well. So yeah, there's definitely points of contact there. Definitely points of contact there.
Well, that's just the type of stuff I'm interested in unpacking, that the connections, the mycelium connections over the millenniums, and how stuff is interlaced, interwoven, and it is what it is now. And I just think it's interesting because it just all comes out of that Baphomet dialogue, and, you know, there's just so much in that still to unpack as well.
So one of the things that the Knights Templar were accused of, which kind of doesn't sound like a major thing when you're also talking about, like, I don't know, like cannibalism, sex orgies, and worshipping a strange idol. The other thing they were accused of was taking each other's confessions, right? Now, in the context of the Catholic Church, that's like, whoa, guy, you mean you're acting like a priest to these other people when you're not actually like legit a priest? That's a big deal, right? And in things like the fraternities, like the Freemasons, one of the things that goes on is this initiatory process, yeah, these death and resurrection kind of processes. And I've done I did the 3 major sort of initiations in the Masons, and in the 3rd initiation, the details of which are only known to initiated Masons or people who've got access to the internet. So in that initiation, right, one of the deals is that you go through this process where you're acting out this whole story about Hiram Abiff, who was the architect of the Great Temple of Solomon. Yeah. So you're laid down, and there's an act done about how you're hit over the head and you kind of die, and then you're sort of resurrected and brought back up. And then basically what they do is they this amazing reveal where they kind of go, okay, you turn around, and depending on the style of temple, there's then a pit, and down in the bottom of the pit there's a coffin, and there's a skull, and there's some crossbones, right? Classic stuff. And essentially, it's very long-winded, but the ritual says, you're going to die. So you need to sort your shit out. You need to make yourself part of the Temple of Solomon. You need to carve the block in whatever way that means. And that means your relationship with your community and your family and this lodge, if that's what you choose to have. And that's what the ritual is. So again, there's an example. Scary, isn't it? A skull and crossbones. Yeah, it's death. Coming to face our own mortality. Like, all this is transient. All this will pass away. That's a powerful, deep magic. Now, interestingly, and Chris Bennett in the book kind of talks about this, and I think he's right, actually. There's a possibility that some of maybe the Templar groups, maybe the Freemason groups at various points, were using in that initiatory process psychoactives in that. They might have been using cannabis. They might have been using orally taken relatively high dose cannabis. In I think it's the 1700s, there's a suggestion that they might have been using acacia. So they might have been using DMT. Because if you're going to do a ritual like that and you're going to make it powerful, the medicine will make that super powerful, and yeah, like any community of people, there's going to be people who are like, you know, have their good days and their bad days. And there would definitely have been like, we know that there were lodges within, with members of I think the Metropolitan Police back in the 80s who were somewhat dodgy, let's say, from my understanding. But essentially, what these communities are is they are mutual support organisations for people, mostly white guys. Yeah, that's mostly the case, not exclusively. And of course, there is female Freemasonry, and there are forms of, like, I know in the States there was like I can't remember what it's called now. Is it like the Night Brotherhood or something? There was one that was like very much part of the black community as well. Most Freemason stuff was totally overground until we hit a thing called World War II. In World War II, the Masons were rounded up and put into concentration camps. And that's why they went underground. And that's what, there were parades in Victorian England. There were parades of, like, there were, I think the figure is something like 1 million people were members of the Masons. Because if you fell on hard times, that's what you did. And also because this ritual where you could get all these people together from different religious backgrounds, but they kind of left all the differences outside and then went through this experience together, which may or may not have had psychedelics, probably for very few people that involved any of that kind of tech. But it was an important thing. And then the Nazis locked them up, and then they started being a little publicity shy, and then people remembered the Leo Taxil hoax and thought it was the truth. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Oh yeah, there's a lot there. There's a lot there. Yeah, but what I do want to tie in, yeah. So there's one, basically, that's the psychedelic, the entheogenic connection. Because what I get from that ultimately is, like, again, this is just one story. It's about this death rebirth thing. No matter where you go, what culture you're dealing with, they're basically saying the same story. And however they get you there, whether it's you sit in a cave for 40 days, take some psychedelics, or look at that coffin down there, or, you know, it's basically to face that, so then you can go and live this liberated life. You know, like make the most of it. I guess that's what Jesus was here for, was trying to teach us, and all of the great prophets and wise ones, is like fundamentally that. So and it ties in because I just think of the, you know, the the rites in ancient Egypt or Kemet, you know, the mummification rituals and the sarcophagus, and, you know, it seems like very consistent throughout history that these are traditions that people have just upkept, whether it's in Asia, Africa, or Europe. Oh yeah.
There's a thing about like thinking of Jung's archetypes as the psychological expression of a physiological truth, right? So there's a physiological truth that women have babies, therefore there are mothers, right? So the Great Mother is an archetype, psychological thing that represents the physiological truth. Women have babies. Yeah? The hero, that when we get to a certain age, we move away in some sense from our parents, either literally or in some cultural sense, to make ourselves. We are the hero, and that's just kind of the way that this thing goes. And it's also true that there is the shadow, there is the difficult stuff, and part of the shadow, one might suggest, is our mortality, is our death. So all of these rituals, they're all like, for me, particularly as a chaos magician, they're all kind of like, they've got like different flavors. It's kind of like there is music, and then there's different genres of music, but the underlying processes are rooted in our biology. They're rooted in things like the fact that we're mortal, and so all those initiation rituals are to encounter our death in some sense, and then to find a new way of sitting with that fact after that, and how that might inform ourselves and our relationships with others. So there's a really interesting field of study called terror management theory, which, as well as having a cool name, is basically the very simple idea. And it's that if you take, you can do an experiment where you have like a range of different pictures of people, right? And you get people to rate how nice the people look on a scale of, like, I don't know, 1 to 10. Like, this person's a 10, they look really amazing, and like, I'd like to chat with them. This person's a 1, they look really scary, I don't want to go anywhere near them, right? So you do this. What you then do is you then take a piece of writing and you read this to the person. And the piece of writing isn't necessarily, it's not overt, but nevertheless, it gives a person enough cues to make them think about their own mortality. Right, so it's a story that includes the suggestion of reminding them of their own death. You then ask them to do the same experiment with a comparable but different set of photographs, and you find something really interesting. What you find is that when people are reminded of their own death, what they tend to do is they tend to then kind of take refuge in their identity. So people who look less like them in that collection of photographs, they are more likely to rate those people as frightening, right? And they're more likely to rate people who look more like them as nicer. And the theory goes that when we come up to our own death, we're so freaked out about it as humans that we take refuge in identity with our nation state, identity with our language group, identity with our religious group, and so on. Now, the thing is, that's if you just remind us of how we're mortal. But if you give people an opportunity to experience something that's analogous to, or maybe similar to their own death, then something different happens. So people who have near-death experiences, by and large, when they come out of those experiences, they're not more frightened of death, and they're not more nasty to other people. In fact, quite the reverse. They tend to become increasingly open and accepting and curious and engaged and connected. And so an initiation ritual, however you do it, however you do this sort of death, is actually taking the person to face their experience and then to pass through it. And then they are less likely basically to become a prejudiced arsehole, is the take-home fact. And the thing that really kind of, you know, I say this I've said this before, but it's like, for me, it's a really important moment, is that European culture had the psychedelic experience at its heart for over 1,000 years at the Temple of Eleusis. And one of the few things we know about Eleusis is the people who went there is enough writing of people saying it was this terrifying and beautiful experience, and then I realized that there was no death, or that I no longer feared death. Now, this is an experience that all of the leaders and all of the philosophers and all of the judges and all of these people would have passed through. And they don't pass through it now, and they haven't done for 1,600 years. And in that time, European culture's done some bad shit. So to bring those experiences back, where we're not just reminded of our death in the sense that we have these kind of little cultural signifiers of, like, you know, you need to do these things, you need to consume all this stuff, you need to, if you're frightened of your death, you can take refuge in signing up to this doctrine or believing in this belief system, or, you know, becoming a whatever. But if we can face our own death, if we can pass through an initiation like the ancient Eleusis initiation, or the Masonic initiation, or something even better that we curate with our peers, with our friends, with the symbol sets that we know and that we love and that make sense to us, that makes a big difference to the way people then go and behave, I would suggest, you know?
Yeah, I think it's like crucial in the here and now, and has been for the last 16+ years, simply because the rights have been removed. You know, like you said, as a 16-year-old from your school, your world, well, where do I start? That's how I feel, you know, come out. So where are the rights now? Where do they come from? And it's going to take some kind of co-creation amongst peers, friends, as a, you know, so we can check ourselves more, because that's basically what it's going to do. It's making you check yourself, a true evaluation. And that's kind of what weaves in, you know, because I wanted to weave in the chaos magic, just get a bit of clarity on that. And, you know, what's, you know, because that's about ritual, ceremony and all that type of stuff, but it has a slightly different approach. And it's, you know, some of the principles within that I live by to this day. You know, once I'm not a practitioner of, you know, in that sense there, but the principles alone just like they just resonate. So could you share something around chaos magic and how that just ties in with the, you know, the conversation we've had about creating your own thing?
Yeah, that last point.
Sorry.
I was going to say that last point that you made about creating your own thing. That's basically the deal. So, like in the 1970s, late 1970s, when chaos magic emerged in Europe, you had basically, you had witchcraft, you had Wicca, this kind of like neo-pagan style of Wicca, and then you had Aleister Crowley's Thelema. Those were the two predominant forms of like occultism. And the Chaos Crew came along, various people, P. Carroll, Dave Lee, Ray Sherwin, various individuals. And they kind of went, well, could we have a way of engaging with magic that isn't based around us having to subscribe to a whole belief system, a whole way of viewing the world, either like witchcraft, neo-pagan kind of thing, or Aleister Crowley fanboys? You know, is there a way we can do this in a different way? And basically the bottom line of it is they kind of went, if you look at all these different traditions, you can see some things in them. You can see how belief structures what's going on. So I believe that this object that I'm carrying has the following significance. You know, we do this all the time. I believe that it is pleasing to the spirits. Most people wouldn't probably put it in this language. When I put a plant sex organ on the grave of someone who's dead. So we lay flowers. That's what we do. So we have a belief about the significance of flowers, plant sex organs, which is, you know, well, it's kind of slightly amusing. We kind of go, oh, I believe that this is a good thing to do. I have all kinds of symbolic meaning. So we have belief. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the different ways of doing magic or the ways of doing initiation or any of these practices, you can see that they have a belief envelope. They have a cultural story around them, right? Which might be like really ancient or might be really modern. Might be quite crazy, like the Discordian stuff, you know, that whole Robert Anton Wilson, 23, you know, Shri Baba Rebop kind of craziness. It might be like very kind of, you know, Americana, I guess kind of, yeah, that kind of wild style. It might come from any different tradition, but it has nevertheless a language. There's a cultural language, a container that's used. Mm-hmm. Then what you got is you've got altered states of awareness. How do you get your altered state of awareness? Well, in some traditions, in some styles, like you say, it's like protracted periods in the dark. It's like long meditation. It might be psychedelics. It might be dancing. It might be sex. It might be like, you know, any number of different practices. So the Chaos Crew basically said, look, you've got belief and you've got altered states of awareness. So you have the paradigm and you have the gnosis. Yeah. So the cultural envelope and the thing that changes awareness. And the thing that changes awareness could be quite minor. It could be like sitting and breathing and just being attentive to the breath. It could be quite calm and chill, or it could be like possession ritual. You know, we're going to do an invocation to Baphomet. We're going to do some, you know, use these magic words and someone's going to be possessed by Baphomet and they'll probably run around and stuff's going to go on. It'll be amazing. So chaos magic kind of evolves like any kind of traditional style, just like in a martial arts style. It has a kind of, you know, these first practitioners, comes in different waves. People kind of connect it with different stuff. But the take home fact is that it's kind of, it's done its work so well that a lot of people are chaos magic practitioners, but they don't necessarily need to use the word because they just describe themselves. They say, well, I'm a kind of an eclectic person. I use this influence, this influence, and this influence. Great, you know, our work here is done to some extent, you know. And going back to what you said, when those people come together, that peer group comes together to share medicine and to do ceremony, they have to figure out what are the symbols that work for us, what's our story, you know, what are the images that we want on our altar. And that is just as legit and just as valuable and just as powerful as anything else that anyone else can do, because if it comes with authenticity and it comes with that real investment of belief, not pretending in something, but having that kind of articulation of the true, and it has that way of changing awareness, meditation, breathing, dancing, psychedelics, then it's going to work, and that's potentially good magic, deep magic.
So two things come out of that. I want to share something that I learned just on that, which ties in with that. And the second part to it, you know, being someone who is now privy to the ancient knowledge and wisdom of the old, and, you know, we're all studying, you know, is that not a disrespect that you're just taking a bit from here, taking a bit from there, and not learning and not focusing on the, you know, the thing for what it's really worth, you know?
I guess it's a little bit like, for me, I mean, there's several things in that. Firstly, you cite your sources. Like if I do a practice, and I try my best to do this, like I pay respect to the people that I've learned from and the traditions, however imperfectly, that I've been informed by, right? So like I don't pretend to be some character or have some lineage that I don't. Yeah, it's like I try and be honest. So that's one thing. And I think one of the things that pisses people off with cultural appropriation, and rightly so, is pretending to be something you're not, or pretending to have some, or like owning something when it's not yours to own. Maybe it's cool for you to use it, maybe, but certainly you have to give the respect to the people whose tradition you've been informed by, or whose language you are adopting. Secondly, I think that this idea that it's just like a supermarket and you can just kind of pick and choose stuff, to some extent that's true. But most people, when they want to kind of engage with magic, they want more depth than that. And so in the same way that if you're a martial arts practitioner, eventually maybe you end up in some situation where you you get in a Bruce Lee way beyond all style, and your style becomes your style, it becomes your technique. But of course you want to learn from the people who know their shit, of course. And you want to pay respect to those people, you want to sit with those people till you get to the point where, and all the good people will eventually get to the stage where they go on, go and do your shit now.
That's right.
Yeah, that's like, we know this, Karate Kid, everyone's watched, that kind of thing. That's part of the deal. The other thing is that tradition for me is about keeping the flame alive, not worshipping the ashes, right? So you've got to keep the flame alive. And every single time someone does a ceremony, like I've been in, peyote ceremonies, the Native American church, and Huichol ceremonies, and and every time it's different, because the time is different, the practitioners are different, the situation is different. Maybe there's similar things, maybe there's a similar element, but it's not about like becoming, it's not like a recipe. It's not like da 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 da, this is how we do it. Do you know what I mean? For me, it's like, yeah, we have a framework and we have the things we're informed by, and then we build what is right for these people in this time, in this moment.
Sounds like,
and we aspire to that. Yeah, we aspire to that.
Yeah, it sounds like permaculture, man.
Yeah, of course. It is the, it is the great knowledge,
Yeah. And also what just comes to mind is just like, just where, cultural appropriation, having to believe in things. I remember when, these ideas were first introduced to me, it was, it's like, well, it was, from the perspective of like, Darren, rather than you go out, trying to find something new or create this thing and you're not sure how to create it, and, because it come down to this belief framework, you no longer hold these values to where they were at one point of time. But you can reconnect or connect with something you once believed in or are passionate about, and it holds as much weight. So I'm saying that to say that I was taught that, not that I was raised in that Christian household, but, you could, for example, people who lose their religion, so to speak, and they're looking for the new thing. They're looking, and then they go to Peru or they go wherever it is and look for it. And I was taught like, no, it was like, at 10 years old, what did you like? What did you believe in? And it was like, for example, being like, I believed in the Transformers. That's what I believed in. I believed that these guys were really what they were, Optimus Prime, the Decepticons, and my imagination. And I was plugged into that. You look at an 8, 9, 10-year-old now, we're in those worlds, and it's like, well, there you go. That's the framework you could use there, because it ties in with kind of what you're saying, that because the cultural identity and connections with it, it was like, okay, so you could make Optimus Prime God, and the Decepticons are the levels, and then you could create rituals and ceremonies geared around the Transformers, and it hold as much weight as somebody who's doing it with these ancient, archetypes, so to speak. And because it is coming from you and that intent and belief in what you're doing and your abilities in your own style.
And the thing is, it's the practice. That's the thing. Do you know what I mean? It's the practice. It's the doing of it. And in the doing of it, sometimes you'll kind of go, actually, it feels now like I need to connect with some kind of ancestral stuff. It feels now like I need to have like a more depth of practice in this domain. But it's like the doing of it. And yeah, I mean, we used to play like games with like the Hermetic kind of Kabbalah, and the 10 spheres and 22 sticks in that kind of diagram. So, okay, so can you take the characters from Star Trek and put them in these different, because they're different archetypes. Of course they are, that's why it works as a story. That's why the Transformers works as a story, because there are these different archetypes represented. And we all kind of go, oh yeah, that's this one, and that's this one, and that's, we understand these things. And if we come from a lineage, and if we have that as part of our story, then brilliant. And if we encounter one of those things and we can learn from that, then again, that's brilliant. If we find ourselves in a situation like I did when I was a kid, where like there was a few little books and a few hints here and there, I had to make the stuff up, and I think that's okay. I think that's okay, and I think that's it's the process of the doing it that then brings us into contact with other things. So I mean, I've spent time, like a number of years ago now, working with a lot of kind of stuff to do with Christianity, because there's a lot of great teaching and a lot of great healing in a lot of that tradition, and just for me as somebody who kind of grew up interested in magic, there I am, the goth kid, you know, Christianity. It was kind of, I never was really like anti it. I never kind of got to this satanic thing, because I just thought, well, that just seems, that's the same thing, but like a different part of the story.
Yeah.
So for me, then to return to some of the teachings in that and to engage with those, which is part of my, I guess, ancestral tradition, that's really important. So those processes where we go, like the hero, we go away from where we are, from our home, and then we do our thing. And then part of that process is then coming back and making this return, maybe doing that several times, you know? Yeah, the Optimus Prime, fantastic.
Just playing around. But we're kind of getting there, Julian. I would like to think, man, that you'd be up for doing this a couple more times so we can unpack more. Just kind of getting into the stuff that I would like to talk about more as well. But I definitely, you know, this platform was also geared around, you know, bringing the attention to psychedelics and the role that they play in people's lives and have played. You started off by showing the magazine that you was written in, when was that,
1993.
That just sounds like, I was born in the 70s, but you know, when I was in 2020, it's like the 1800s. It's like getting like 90s. But you've got history, right? So you've got history in this field, and I'd just like to know about your role in the psychedelic community, whether that's through being a writer, as I know you are an author, to what, you know, what do you do, and then what is, you know, why are you doing it?
I guess it was because, like I say, about maybe 20 years ago, I started bringing together a lot more of the kind of the psychedelic side of, and of my interests with the magic thing. So, I mean, I come at all this stuff as an occultist, primarily as a magician, like I have to. I mean, I now find myself getting to, you know, like yourself, hang out with this. I mean, one of the things I love about the psychedelic scene at its best is that it brings together people from many, many different kind of aspects of what's going on. You know, it's one of the reasons I'm involved in Breaking Convention, because I think that we certainly have an aspiration to bring a very diverse community together to engage with this stuff, whether that's like indigenous ayahuasca folks, or whether or not it's people that are kind of dealing with the legal side of things, or the kind of medical research. So I guess over the last 20 years, I've kind of got more and more involved in that, involved in things like Breaking Convention. So, and even though I've got, you know, I don't have formal academic qualifications in the field, like I sit on the board of a peer review academic journal. So I've obviously kind of learned it enough that some people at least believe that, you know, I know what I'm up to-ish. It's all a work in progress, of course. And I think the thing about psychedelics for me is that they are, going back to the shit, actually, the thing about a psychedelic is it's a stuff, it's a thing. It's like a material product. You can buy it, you can sell it, you can do good stuff with it and bad stuff with it. It's like an actual physical thing. You can point at it and go, right, inside that N grams of psilocybin, there is all this possibility of healing and beauty and shadow work and all of this kind of stuff. And I kind of like the alchemy of that. I also like the alchemy of like, how do we deal with this? Because this is a product, can be bought and sold, exploited, given to people without their knowledge. It can be owned like it currently is, you know, in terms of like who's allowed to have it, who has a license, who doesn't have a license. Because of course, as we know, none of these things are illegal. It's all about licensing and who's permitted to use these substances. So it's, I agree with Terence McKenna to some extent, in as much as like you can just go, this may not be the answer in and of itself, this magical substance, but this magical substance with this wrapper around it is big news, is a big news. And that's why, yeah, for me, involvement with Breaking Convention, involvement with things like prisoner work as well, with trying to make people aware of the fact that there are still lots and lots and lots of people in prison and continuing to go to prison because of the drug war, which is, you know, racist and brutal and pointless and a terrible thing to have visited on our planet, and to be able to kind of challenge those things. So, you know, I'm very pleased to be talking to you at a time when I've learned that Leonard Picard is going to be released from jail, which is amazing, you know. So yeah, that's my kind of engagement with that field. And I guess because of where I come to it, some of it is academic, some of it is like, you know, working with particular people in contexts where it's safe and legal to do so, doing like supporting people in their journeys or doing ceremonial work or whatever with psychedelics, writing about those subjects, trying to kind of make them accessible to people as much as I possibly can.
Thank you, man. So we're in what's being coined as the, you know, the psychedelic renaissance, the third wave, and there's just different things being pushed apart. And you're definitely a part of it. I like to think I'm a part of it now, whatever they want to call it. But you've got materials out there. So I'll definitely, because one of them I've got, I don't actually have it to hand. It's not on the bookshelf there. But can you share some of your, you know, what because you've captured some of this, man. You've actually, and I think that's really important in capturing and documenting and making that accessible outside of speaking on conferences and behind the scenes stuff, just all the different ways that it's documented. That's what I'm trying to do now with this platform. So how have you documented and captured this in your works? Can you please share with us, Julian?
Lots of different ways. I mean, a lot of the books that I've written are about magic in one way or another. So they have that kind of, that's the wrapper, that's the container, because that's where I'm coming from. So a lot of them are stories of magical rituals, some of which involve psychedelics, some of which don't. But I guess having done this for a little while, my material appears in all sorts of different places, like various like academic collections. I do a lot of stuff online, so I produce a lot of kind of like, you know, YouTube things and the blog that I've been doing since like 2011, which isn't just exclusively psychedelics. It also has like political stuff in there. It also has kind of more esoteric material in there, stuff about kind of, you know, meditative practices and various other things. So I guess I think of myself as a writer, really, because I kind of enjoy it, and because I kind of find myself doing it even when I don't really mean to. So I'll kind of dust off a project and think, oh, that's done. And then sooner or later, some like little gnarly spirit turns up and goes, oh, do you want to do this? Here's another idea. Oh, why don't you do this? So I do. I mean, writing Getting Higher for me was quite a big deal, because that was a book which I thought for years and years I wanted to have like a really accessible book.
Is it accessible there, Julian? Have you got one copy around you that you can put on the screen?
I don't know if I have. Yes, if we got one. Oh yeah, here we are.
Because I was looking for my one and it's not on the shelf. So yeah, because that's
okay. Product placement, brilliant.
Yeah,
so what I was trying to do was I tried to write something relatively short, relatively pithy, with a little bit of a kind of jokey kind of element in some of the material, without banging on too much about harm reduction, because like there's enough voices telling us about the dangers, and obviously it says in here like be thoughtful, do your research, make sure you know what you're using. But a lot of it is also hopefully a bit playful, because it's like,
dude,
man, you know, you're a group of youth somewhere and you've got access to some mushrooms, let's say, and you want to take them. Great, fantastic, you can have an amazing time. And this is just like a bunch of serving suggestions, like you could do it this way, you could do it in this kind of therapeutic kind of domain, fold the medicine in, eye shades, go into the darkness, go into that vision, have someone sit for you maybe. You could do this as a peer group. You find your symbols, like what are the ones that speak to you in your community, you put those together, you sit together, you go through the night or through the process, whatever. Maybe you take some, you go for a walk, maybe you make offerings, hopefully in a way that doesn't damage the environment, into the places you find in that walk, you know. So it's just like hopefully quite an accessible set of like.
Very, not hopefully, Julian, you've done the job, man.
Man, thank you so much.
Reference to it, I'd recommend people getting the book. I'm just always, I can't remember, obviously I don't know word for word, line for line, but just the way you open up the book, the story that you share at the beginning of the book, in your encounter and your relationship with your partner. If it was your partner now, your partner at the time, but it was just like, now this is, you just start it off on a journey where, you know, okay, this is not just a fact, you know, be safe.
Yeah.
It's poetic, it's fun, and because of the elements that you bring of your background, it's woven in there, you know, the magic, the principles. So yeah, for me, it's just like one that you can actually do in a day, like you can do it a couple of days and do it again and refer to it. So yeah, like it's a handy book to the point where I don't know where it's not around, but it's always around. It's always just around, because
I'm looking forward to your book, Darren. I'm looking forward to your book. Like I hear that there's a legend out there that there might be like a text being worked on. I don't know. Is that the case?
Yeah, there's components of text being put together like yourself. You know, I actually did attempt to consciously take out time to just work on a product, and I just realized it's not as easy as I thought it was going to be, you know, as far as creating that space and place for me. And then this time around, due to the current climate we're in, I got a lot of space and free time, and I had to evaluate how I was going to push this material forward. So this is one of the vehicles that was going to allow me to do it instantly while not beating up on myself the fact that I'm not writing a book and like, you need to finish off the book, because there's just a lot more to it than I initially thought there was going to be, and just compiling it together. So I've got some nice bits and pieces. Some stuff will be released, you know, and put out there in the near future, but I'm going to be using the digital platforms to extend the information sooner rather than the time I finish writing this book.
I mean, man, it's all a work in progress. I mean, the one of the things about getting higher that I was really pleased to be able to include was, like, I remember having a conversation with my son, who was probably about 14 at the time, and he said, like, what's the problem with acid? And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, look, you know, yes, people might take too much, whatever that means, but people might take too many chocolate biscuits, you know, and end up ill from that. So, like, what's the deal? Why are people so, he was also kind of like saying, why are people so scared of this thing? You know, these psychedelics, why are people frightened of them? And I said, it's because they're very, they're kind of quite plastic, and they're quite able to be influenced by circumstance. And so you could be with a group of people, group of your friends, having a fantastic journey through a landscape, and you might look at a tree and you might say, oh, look at all the little faces in the tree. And that might be a beautiful moment. Or you could be in a less good environment and you might go, oh, look at all the little faces in the tree. And it's the same thing, and the only difference is what you've wrapped around it. So that's why this was like psychedelic ceremony. It's like, whether we call it sessions or ceremonies, who cares? If you have the medicine, people can buy the stuff off the darknet, dead easy, very, very straightforward. You know, people can access these materials, and increasingly so. And we know that these materials can be beneficial for us as communities, and therefore for individuals, and therefore for communities. But we need to have the intelligence about how to run these things. And I've learned loads of stuff from loads of different people, and this work is just like the confluence of all the great teachers that have taught me. And I hope I've represented it well. Thank you very much for your kind comments about it, Darren. It's that matters, man. It's really appreciated.
No, it translates well. It speaks to my language and the people who I communicate with, where, you know, there's just worlds of and wealth of information out there, and there's just a few resources that I can say, you know, you go there, and you go there, you're going to be all right. Starting off like just that there, and that would definitely be one of those, without all the rigmarole and the ego, the bravado, the idea that I have to go to Brazil to do it authentically. I got to do this, like, you know, just check out a few of these guys who've been doing it. They got, you know, and hear what they've got to say from their perspective, and relax.
Yeah, totally. And just like
experience.
Relax and experience, and also what you said about, like, you don't have to go somewhere else, right? I mean, you know, we've just had Maria Sabina's birthday, right? And Maria Sabina, like, anyone who's watching this who isn't familiar with the story of Maria Sabina should go and check out this lady, because she's the reason that you and I are having this conversation to some extent, and the reason that people are probably engaging with this. This is this amazing Mazatec lady, healer, working with the mushrooms, encountered by European culture in the 1950s. And one of the things is that this beautiful lady, who was very, very generous at sharing the mushrooms with the people who went over to sit with her. Ultimately, the mushrooms were analyzed by Albert Hofmann, who, of course, was the discoverer of LSD. This whole story of then reminding us that actually the psilocybin mushroom grew in our landscape all the time. Yeah, it's all over Wales. It's all over loads of parts of British Isles. It was already there. And Maria Sabina's life became very difficult because loads of people, like, rocked up to her little house. You know, like the Rolling Stones went there, and, like, I don't know, like John Lennon went there. Like, and so it was very difficult for this, like, this woman in her small community in Mexico. And so we have to be really thoughtful when we decide to jump on the plane to Iquitos or Mapia or wherever, you know, because the medicine can be found through cultivation, through discovery, and in our own hearts. And that's really where it comes down to. And there's nothing wrong with necessarily going off into these places to take ayahuasca or whatever. but you just have to be really mindful about it, because it can go horribly wrong, and it can be really damaging for, not that those people are without agency, but the power relationship is such that you just have to be really thoughtful about it. And I hope with this book that people will be inspired, maybe to go to these places, maybe to sit with these ancient traditions, maybe to encounter them. That would be great. But mostly in a chaos magic style, to build it for themselves, build it here, build it now, do the cultivation, do the research, do the work, do it with your friends, and find the healing, here and now.
Yeah, that's where the power truly is, Julian. I really do believe that, like we always tend to go outside of ourselves to find ourselves. We always seem to, it's the grass is greener. And as well as I know, that there's a wealth of knowledge and rich history, although it may not be readily available, but it's there, it is accessible in this part of the world, and all you need to do is get yourself to the West Country, and there's an abundance of natural plants and fauna and all that grows, that all complements what we're talking about, as well as a history that's there, and I know that you're affiliated with the museum up in Cornwall, the Museum of Witchcraft, and then there, I've got the opportunity to go there myself on a couple of occasions, and it's there, it's there. The Peruvian, version, it's there, it's here, and I'm first generation, born in the UK, conceived here. I wasn't flown over, brought over. I'm part of the Epping Forest, environment, what my mother was breathing in while I was being formed inside a room. So I'm interested in this stuff, I'm genuinely interested. And that was just part of me exploring and wanting to know more about African and Caribbean culture, yes. I also want to know about the British history and the culture. And I was finding out that there wasn't many people that interested, let alone who knew that information, at the forefront of the people that are sharing information about psychedelics in particular. So it took going to speak to witches and warlocks and wizards and stuff. That's where the information's held in this part of the world, in those mysteries, it seemed like. So I'm glad that you fly many flags and are able to kind of navigate through and then share the wisdom, and it comes through in that book, definitely. And I would like to think we can do this again, Julian, and open up that conversation of like, why are you in Cornwall? What do you do there? And what's all that about? And why is there a museum there about witchcraft? Like, because I know I'm interested in Cornwall, and we can maybe open up the space there and go wherever we go moving forward.
Yeah, that'd be great. I mean, it'd be great to talk about things like sacred landscape. Go closer into the discussion about maybe psilocybin as well, and that whole narrative, man. There's a lot more good shit to come.
Yeah. I've committed to doing what I've gathered is at least it's going to be quite at least 3 sessions, like of back and forth before that's how we say, before you start the journey of the alone into the alone. So before, I'm thinking, there's a lot more Julian's got to offer. There's more, I'm aware of things that I've not gone into that I know you cover, and there's still the unknown. So I still would like to unpack a little bit more of that, and then just see where we can go, man.
Yeah, and I'd like to hear and find out like more about like your work with that as well, because I'd be really interested to kind of, how it is, like you can only understand something by being able to kind of reach out to these multiple perspectives, so like understanding your journey with that, Darren, I think would be really fascinating for me, and like how that encounter, including with the kind of the psychedelic stuff, like how that's unfolding for you. Because I think one of the things that really interests me is that we know, in common with lots of things in the world, psychedelics can become, it can easily seem to be owned by professional, older individuals from certain kind of class or economic structures or whatever. And that's, I've got a foot in that realm, but come from quite a different kind of story in some respects, both in terms of the magic thing and also in terms of my own, class and personal background. And one of the things I think about psychedelics is, and this is really kind of happening now, and you're part of this very much, is this broadening of the community, and not just a broadening, but also a deepening at the same time. So giving people more understanding about how they might engage with the sacred mushroom, for example. That is essential work. We've got to build this from the grassroots up. Yeah, we're permaculturists. We know this is the way to do it.
Yeah, mate. I'll smell them and see them, and hopefully we can rub shoulders more and build and survey and analyze and make sense of all of this, man. To design and implement and maintain, like these tools, all that good stuff. But yeah, no, I appreciate it, Julian. Yeah, man, let's do this, man. I'm happy to share. You know, this is what this platform is about. It's me sharing, getting an opportunity to get my perspective out there for those who are not able to get to the talks, not able to get to the workshops, and interested in what I've got to say. I find that's cool. But what I find more interesting is the people that inspire me. So I find them more interested in myself. So I want to put them on the platform as well, hear what they've got to say and stuff. So with that said, I find that I've got a little balance there, and it gives a way in for people now who may like, oh, Darren's hanging out with these guys. I see Darren was in Berlin and he posted a picture with this guy in Berlin. What they doing in Berlin at these places? And I can then bring it home and say, look, this is the guy you saw me in the picture with in Berlin, and this is what he's all about. Oh, he's a devil worshipper, is he? All right, let me invite him on my platform so people can hear and see and know that I'm where we'll be. And even to kind of answer your question, Julian, it's like the journeys, I always say in my talks in journeys, they're just one story. You know, there's one story. So my story is your story. It's the same story, just in different locations. And that's why I share my story in the way I do, and can give you a historical and a global story. And people think you've done a lot of research. You're like, no, it's just one story I studied, you know. It's like, because humans, you know, are humans, and you see it playing out in certain ways, and I could just see the consistency in all of that. So if me and you can chop it up and show some of the parallels, that's what our, you know, and you know, in our way of life, our approaches. You're into permaculture, I'm into mushrooms. Like, how does that work? You know, it would appear that we're from total opposite ends of the spectrum, but there's a lot more going on that meets the eye. So with that said, I'll be happy to do more of it and share more and exchange.
Well, it's all about, you know, we know this, it's all about mutually beneficial outcomes. It's all about that ecotone and that interface between things, because that's where the power lies.
Yeah, for sure. So Julian, all I can say is thank you for sharing your time and your knowledge and wisdom with us. Again, it's just a pleasure to share platforms with you, and I'm now sharing my platform with you, and you're on it as a guest, and it's official now. So you will be one of my invited guests again, and we'll just chop it up and talk more shit and see where we go. But thanks again, my man, and enjoy the rest of your day, and let's catch up soon.
All right, nice one, Darren. I'll see you soon.
Peace, man.
Ciao.